Hello and welcome back here on the Ludwig Fusel channel to a new video of my C++ tutorial series. In the last video we finally managed to read INI files from disk. So we had the config.ini, like a simple INI file like Windows knows it, which you probably already encountered at some point in your life, and what we basically managed is that we are able to read this file from our C application, and then we can parse it and we can output the parsing as a log file, which we had here. Maybe let's zoom in a bit. Like that log file here, which basically told which values were in there with sections, keys and names. Not names, values, keys and values. And what we also did is we're printing them to the screen. Now, this was very, very useful, but we had one main drawback. And that drawback was that we were not able to specify the INI file. The application would always take a look at the config.ini file at the current execution directory, and it would parse it, which might be fine, but might be not. The issue with that is basically that we do not always want to read config.ini files. I mean, yeah, if our IMI parser would be installed on our system, we would have a command that we could enter, like just INI parser, and then like it would parse or try to parse the config.ini file. However, we might not always have a file called config.ini. The file might be called settings.ini. So currently, if I would do this with settings, it wouldn't work. If I would rename this file to settings.ini and start the application, let's maybe do this here, or actually we can do this full in with Visual Studio. If I would go in here and rename the file to settings.ini, and I would start the application, we would get no output, because basically the file was not found because we have renamed it. If I undo that, or undo this like that, so config.ini, if I rename it back again, start it again, now you can see we are getting our text back, because now it found the file and everything was good. Now, again, this is not something that we want. We want to have our application very, very flexible. We might be defaulting to something, so if we don't specify a file, we basically want to, by default, take the config.ini file. But we always want to have the option to specify a different file. Well, what you could do here to solve this very quickly, you could do a char array, call it file name, make this array at some certain size, and then you call the scanfs to safely scan something in. You would then have the format, the file name, and the size. So if I would now say something like %s to read a string, maybe I'm gonna print for before that, and I would maybe say something like please enter the file, then I would be able to do this. So if I would do this like that, oh no, of course there is something wrong here. Don't mind that exception that just has been thrown into the error. This is because I press Ctrl C, and Ctrl C is a special thing on Linux. This, or if you are not on debug, it will terminate the application. So if I would just replace that here with the file name and start this, everything would be fine. Please enter the file. Now I could say settings.ini and would get nothing because I haven't renamed it. But what I could also do is say config.ini, and if I now type in config.ini, you can see that we are getting the right properties. And yeah, that's one solution to do it. However, this is not a very good solution. Why is that not a very good solution? Well, because the issue with that solution is that the user needs to type in the file at runtime. Like normally you would say, does it really matter? But yes, it does matter, because at some point, especially if you are if you're knowing Linux, if you are a Linux expert and know how the command line works, you know that many programs you use, you're basically specifying the parameters when you are starting the application, so-called command line arguments. You basically directly, when starting the application, before actually starting the application, you are already giving the application its parameters. The good thing on that is that it's integrated. For example, if you're using Microsoft Active Directory, directory installer, so creating an MSI installer or an exe installer, or like anything else, like any task that can run on the system. They all have the support of specifying command line arguments. But what they don't support is they don't support entering something at runtime. So if you want to automate a task and you are doing it like that, basically what happens is that the user still needs to enter the file. It cannot be automated by specifying arguments to the application. Now, I already gave the solution here by explaining why this is bad. We want to have arguments. Now, to show this to you again, arguments are the parameters that you can add to an application. Let's quickly go. I think I already have it open here. Yes, my x64 debug folder here where all of my code has been outputted. So let's quickly open up the command line here, the CMD, and quickly inspect what's going on. So for example, I could use the pointers.exe. If I execute pointers.exe, it starts the application. Now, if I want to specify command line arguments, I can basically just write something behind it. So for example, I could say something like 10 to 20 and 5, if these would be the parameters for our application, so 10, 25. In this case, if I run this, it's not going to do anything because our application or pointers.exe was not aware of that. Same with my INI parser. Now it's asking for that file, and again, if I press Ctrl C, I can stop this there, and if I'm with Visual Studio, it's gonna throw us errors. But basically, what you can see here now, it's basically telling us that we should enter the file. So I could say config.ini, it's not there, so it's not gonna work. However, this is not the way how I want to do it. I basically want to do this to basically specify the config ini here. So I basically say ini parser.exe config.ini. And what I basically want to do then is, if this is specified, that I basically want to skip that one or automatically fill in config.ini here. So that you can basically specify this when you start the application. For the normal use case, if you are calling the application like that, it's totally fine. It doesn't matter how you do it. However, if you want to automate the task, if you want to automate that, that's better because this can be automated, right? Because this is something, I'm currently entering this into the console, but this could be also started by a different application, Active Directory, installers, whatever. And what they can basically do is you tell it the application that they shall execute and the arguments that it shall append. And these arguments can be dynamic, whatever the application supports that you're using. Active Directory, I don't know if it supports, I think Active Directory supports to have this dynamically assigned. However, many applications support this to basically tell, all right, I want to call that application with the file that has been just copied, or an installer. Every ini file that gets copied, execute ini parser exe for it and output the log. So basically what I want to do is I want to allow the acceptance of these this format, so that we basically append it at the end of the call here. So exe that we want to execute, parameters. And these are the so-called command line arguments. Now, how do we get access to command line arguments? Well, in C it's very simple, and it involves just modifying our main function. Now, as you can see, our main function did take no parameters, and this is totally fine, because C supports multiple versions of main. And this main is one version. There's actually a void main, which returns nothing. Would work as well if I would build this. It should work. You can see it still builds, and if I would execute this, still does the thing. Config.ini still does the thing. This is kind of like a version that we already had of the main. But you can of course also support int. I would always use int because you don't need to put a return in here. We talked about this earlier. This is optional, that return, so just always keep it as int. So at some point you might return something, so just always have it in here. However, what we are talking about are the arguments in the main function itself. So basically what happens is that if we are implementing a different version of the main, the C runtime will supply the command line arguments as parameters to our main function. So basically, we need to add parameters inside here. What are these parameters? Well, the parameters are two things. The first one is a int argz, and the second one is a char pointer argv. This is how the most common version of the main looks. Int is the return code of the application, so did it succeed, did it not succeed. Main is kind of like the name, the main entry function. And on the right we have parameters for the command line arguments. Now what does these parameters mean? Argz means argument count. So how many arguments were given to that application? argv means argument data values. argv, argument values. Now let's talk about the type. Why is that a char pointer pointer? If it would be a normal char, you would definitely think, yeah, that makes sense. If it would be a normal char, it would just be the string that has been given in here, or maybe just that one, or both of them. However, it would make sense, because this is like a string. This is a long string that gets appended and called. Wouldn't it make sense to basically see it just as a char pointer? It would make sense, however, that is not how it works, because what would happen if you actually want to have some text like hello world? If you would want to have something like that, you really don't know what's going on, because hello world could be hello and world exclamation mark or hello world. And you could not deduce that just by the format on how it would be entered here. So what Microsoft and also Linux support is adding quotation marks. Now, do I have caps enabled? Yeah. Basically, you can add quotation marks here, and by providing the quotation marks, you're basically going to tell it this is one single argument. Especially useful if you're specifying a path on Windows. And path on Windows, you can have folders with spaces in between. And if you would have a space in there, it would be an issue, but if you have it in quotation marks, it's fine. So now what the runtime does is, it is splitting your command line arguments on the space. So by default, if it has a space, it's going to split the command line into multiple parts. If it finds quotation marks, then it's going to ignore spaces until it finds a quotation mark again. But the idea is that every space separates one argument. Now, we need a way to deduce this in C and C++ as well. So this is why we have a char pointer pointer. So what this basically is, it is a pointer to a string. Now, what can a pointer to a string also be? It could be an array of strings. So a string itself is a pointer to the first character. Now, if we have a pointer to a pointer, we are kind of like having a pointer to a location where the pointer to the first character of the string is stored. And we know that kind of like a pointer to something can also be an array. And that is exactly what this is. This is the first element of an array. That one, kind of like the first element of the array, pointer to the first element of the array. And that one is the type that we have inside of the array. And the type inside the array is a pointer to the first character of a string, which is exactly what we want. So basically we have an array of that count of strings. Now, to prove that this is good, let's write a quick for loop. So for int I equals 0, I smaller arg z, I plus plus, to basically just quickly iterate over them. And what I want to do is I want to do a printf and basically, let's say, maybe output the integer and then output the string itself. So I arg v at position I, something like that. Maybe also a new line, this would be good. New line here, and let's see what we got. So let's start this with our default application, and what we get here is that the first argument is C uses tutorial document ccpp tutorial build bin x64 debug ini parser.exe. Please enter the file. Now config.ini, and it would read this. Now let's also test this from the normal CMD so that we can play a bit around with these, and let's start and test a few examples. So first, just with config.ini, you can see first argument ini parser.exe. It's exactly that one that we have entered here. Second parameter config.ini, yeah, that one, second one. And it asks us for a file, which we don't want. Now let's try out the other ones. Where are they? Here, for example, the hello world. Now you can see the issue that I just described. You can see that the first argument is ini parser.exe, second one config.ini, third hello, and fourth word exclamation mark. But I do actually want to put hello world in a inline. So if I add the quotation marks around the hello world, you can see that now if I now execute this, you're going to get as a first argument the ini parser.exe again, second argument config.ini, but the third argument is now no longer hello, and we are also missing the world. Now it's completely concatenated together because of the quotation marks, and we have a single hello world. So that's basically how these command line arguments work. So now let's try and put these to use. But before we put this to use, I'm going to say it out again. The first argument is always going to be the executable itself, however it has been called. If it has been called by just the name, there's just going to be the name. If the full path was specified, there's a full path. If a relative path has been specified, it's going to be a relative path. It's not always going to be the direct location of the exe file. So you need to be a bit careful with this value. Just to alert you on that. But now let's actually put this to use. So what we basically want to check is that first the arg C is at a certain value. What value do we want to have it to be? Well, we want to have it at 2 arguments. One is going to be the actual application that we started, and another one, the second one, is going to be our configuration file that we want to load. Now, what we can also do is we can check if it's not 2. So in case it's not 2, we can printf a message and we can return -1, which means error. So we could kind of like say validate arg z count, or actually argument count. Now if it's not 0, I'm basically going to say usage ini parser path to ini file. So just like that, I'm basically going to tell the user the usage if the argument count was not correct. So now that the argument count is correct, we can now parse the ini file. And now instead of the file name, I can take my argv. The first one was the path to the executable. That's not the one that we want. We want to have the second one, that count equals to 1, which is specifying the path of our ini file. Now, if I start it like that, you're going to get an error. Usage ini parser path to ini file. Exited with code -1, so basically we had a failure. Now, this is all nice and good, and if I would try to run this now from the CMD here with config.ini, I'm also gonna get, am I on release? No, I know what the issue is. Of course, it's now specifying the path, but it can't find the file, so we are not getting an output. It can't find the file because the file is actually in a different location. The file is actually inside that path, so what I could do is I could quickly copy over the location here. I'm going to say ini parser again, and I can paste in. Can I not paste that in? Why can't I paste this in? Let's copy this again and try to paste it. Yeah, there we go. Now I can enter the path here. I could say config.ini, and if I would enter that now, you can see it works. Now I specified the full path to the config.ini file in here, and it correctly parsed it. However, we of course want to have this working from Visual Studio as well. How can we make that work from Visual Studio? Well, we need to adjust the debugging parameters. I go to my project, right-click it, go to properties, make sure I have all configurations and all platforms selected. And what I now want to do is I want to check these 2 parameters. First, the working directory, it's our project directory. We already talked about that. This is why we put the config.ini file there. And now we can also see that we have a comment arguments. So comment arguments are our arguments that we want to use. Now, since we are already in the correct folder, we can just say config.ini. And if I type in here config.ini, hit apply, OK, and press F5 inside of Visual Studio, you're going to see it's working here as well. It's working here now because it has the correct arguments supplied to the exe, as it was validated here. And now we have a very flexible application. Now this application is already useful. You can give it an ini file, and it tells you what's inside of the ini file and provides you a log. Now, I have one issue with that log file. The issue with the log file is that I might not want to output this to a actual file on disk. I actually want to be flexible and allow it to, or allow the user to specify if he wants logging or not. Now, how can we specify logging or not? Well, we can add another command line argument. What I basically want to do is I want to check if it is smaller than 2 or bigger than 3. So if it's smaller than 2, it's bad because we just have the executable, and if it's bigger than 3, it's also bad because we have more than we intended to use. So what I also want to do is I want to add an optional argument here, and this is going to be the path to log file. Now we basically, as a usage, have the path to an INI file and the path to a log file, while this is kind of like required and that one is optional. I know there are some constraints, and wouldn't need to look this up, what is optional and what is required. You could add something like, say, optional path to log file. Now it's completely clear what's going on here. Now, how do we evaluate the log file path? So let's say check log file path, and I'm basically going to say const char pointer log file, and the log file is going to be null. Null is going to indicate that we don't want to have logging enabled. And now I'm going to check if argc equals 3. So if we have 3 arguments, or we could also say bigger equal 3. If I say bigger equal 3 here, this is going to be a bit more solid if we add more arguments, because now the 3 is the maximum. However, in the future, 3 might not be the maximum. And if I then allow more arguments later on, I can just add 4 in here, and I don't need to change this one later. Now, because it is already checking all the conditions. Now, what I basically want to do, I want to say that the log file is equal to argv at position 2, so the third element. This works now because we are assigning a pointer. We are not copying strings, we are not doing anything. This array of strings has already been allocated by operating system, runtime, whatever, and we are basically just setting our pointer to a value. And now we just need to pass this to my pass INI. Our INI currently does not support changing of logging, but I'm going to add this now. I'm going to add a const char log file path here and here, so that they both support that. Now I'm going to go to the ini parser.c, add the one here, add the one there. Now I just need to add this log file path to that ini parser call as well. And now down here where we opened the file, I basically want to check if my log file path is existing so that it is not null. And in case it's not null, I'm going to fopen the file. And now instead of having that static path in here to the log file, I'm entering the log file path here. And what this allows us now is to specify the log file if we need it. Now let's do a quick build here, Control B. And yeah, of course, we need to add the arguments here as well. So log file needs to be passed on here as well. But now it should build. Now I built it, okay. And now I can test this out. Let's take a look at my debug folder. You can see that I already have a log file here because I invoked this previously. Let me quickly delete that log file here so that you can see it's gonna stay away. Opening up the console, and I'm gonna invoke this again with the config.ini. You can see we are getting all the data. But if I would now check the folder, no, not that one. Let's open up the correct one, that one. If I check this, let's press F5 to reload it. You can see we have no log file in here. However, what I can do is I can say my funny log.log. And if I would do this like that with the my funny log.log and check that folder here, you can already see there is the file my funny log.log. And if I open that up, we got our usual logging content. So also that with command line arguments, very simple. Null, also very powerful. Null is one of the most amazing things in C and C++ because having a pointer that is null as an optional thing is always good because it indicates that the optional thing was not specified by having it to null, or later on in C++, null pointer. So that concludes the video of today. In the next video, we're going to do something amazing. In the next video, we're going to make our INI parsing way more flexible by providing a custom callback. Currently, it's static. It's always going to output this in the format that we have hard-coded in here. However, we want to move towards putting everything in a library. And if I put everything in a library, I want to have it as flexible as possible. So main.c should be the one that specifies what to do with the data of the log file, not our INI parser. And that's what we're going to do in the next video. So hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like and subscribe, and have a nice day. Until next time, bye.